All right, welcome back to Social Studies. And today we're going to start reading chapter 6, which is titled Some Major Decisions. And of course, if you remember in the previous chapter, it was the delegates had just come together. They called this special convention. And where was the special convention? It was in Philadelphia. And the reason it was in Philadelphia was because Philadelphia was the city that was kind of in between all the colonies. It was just smack dab in the middle. It was in Pennsylvania, of course. And the place where they're holding this convention was actually the same building, the same room that they had signed the Declaration of Independence back in 1776. So it held special meeting for them to meet there. And of course, we had special leaders who we talked about who we remember showing up for this convention. James Madison, George Washington, and Ben Franklin were just three of the big leaders that everybody knew about that came for the convention. And if you remember in chapter 5 where we read, James Madison actually arrived. Well, he thought he was 11 days early, but he ended up being way early. So he had all this time before the convention actually started and people started talking. And him and the other delegates from Virginia, because that's who he was a delegate for, the colony, the state of Virginia. And so they got together before the convention actually started, and they came up with what they called the Virginia Plan, which today in chapter 6, we're going to learn about what their Virginia Plan entailed, all the things that they came up with, the ideas they came up with. And I want you to follow along in the chapter as I read it, if you can. But listen too, because I'm going to be answering basically some of the questions that you're going to be answering on your worksheet will be answered during the reading. So pay attention and follow along, okay? So let's start on page 44, chapter 6, Some Major Decisions. And before we begin, the big question, this is one of the questions you're going to answer by the time we're done. It says, what was the Virginia Plan and why might some delegates have objected to it? So we're obviously going to learn about the Virginia Plan in this lesson. And probably why some of the delegates might not have liked it. Anyway, so a need for secrecy. Let's start at the top. Right at the start, delegates made two important decisions. This is one of the questions you're going to answer on your worksheet, okay? The first thing that they decided was choosing George Washington as the chairman of the convention. You needed to have somebody who was in charge. So like if delegates are yelling and screaming at each other, George Washington's going to bang on the, hey, quiet down. Kind of like I do on the meets when you guys are all just chatting and somebody says they have a question and I have to tell you all to mute your mics, right? So that's what the George Washington kind of was. He was the chairman and he kind of managed the meeting of all of these people. And that was an easy decision because Washington was everyone's first choice. Everybody knew him from the American Revolution, and he had a great reputation as a general and helping us win that war, right? So everybody voted him, said, hey, yep, George Washington, he's the guy. Anyway, the second decision was to keep all discussions secret. That way, each person can express his ideas freely. He could even change his mind about an issue without having to face public disapproval. The delegates would not have to worry about newspapers or citizens looking over their shoulders and criticizing this or that proposal. Instead, the convention would present its final plan to the people and say, this is the result of our best efforts. Now, it is for you, the people, to say yes or no. So, second decision they made, keep it a secret. Not that they were keeping it a secret from each other that were in the convention, but from the outside. They didn't want people, they didn't allow the public in to watch them have a debate. They didn't allow newspaper people in because they didn't want their votes or their ideas swayed, or people to be like, if you have an idea sometime and it's not the normal and people don't necessarily like it, you don't want everybody out there being there to influence you. So they're like, we're just gonna keep it secret. Everybody in this room will know what's going on, but we're not gonna go outside. You're not gonna go home and tell your wife. You're not gonna go home and tell your friend, George down the street or Jimmy or whatever. So they wanted to keep it a secret. So two things they did. The first two decisions made George Washington the chairman of the convention. And the second thing, they decided to keep it secret. All right. So page 44, last paragraph. Such secrecy meant not only closed doors, but closed windows. Now, the summer of 1787, when they're having this convention, was Philadelphia's hottest in nearly 40 years. With not a breath of fresh air entering the hot and sticky room, delegates sweltered in the miserable heat. Mosquitoes bit right through the delegates' clothing, and big blue bottle flies, there we go, not nose, danced around their heads. It was a wonder the uncomfortable delegates could concentrate on their work. Now, this is before air conditioning, so it's not like they could just, close the windows and turn the air conditioning on and cool off. No. It'd be like summertime, well, maybe not as bad as summertime here in Arizona, but summertime there, hot, close the windows, grandma's not turning the air on, the windows are closed, and you got on hot, okay? And they're having to make some tough decisions based in this miserable heat, right? So let's go on to page 45. We have a picture of Mr. George Washington, who was elected chairman of the convention. See, it says George Washington, elected chairman of the convention. And, of course, he's like, I cannot tell a lie. Anyway, no. So let's go on page 46. All right. So if the meetings were so secret, how do we know what was said there? That's true. Well, here's how. We owe that to several delegates who took notes, especially James Madison. See, sometimes taking notes is a good thing because then others know what's going on when it's, whatever. So Madison chose a seat at the very front. He was that scholar. Shelby, that's why you sit in the front. Chelsea, that's why you sit in the front. Anyway, just kidding. You guys made a comment about that today. So anyway, back to this. Madison chose a seat at the very front where he could plainly hear every delegate. I was not absent a single day, Madison wrote later, no more than a fraction of an hour in any day. Using his own system of abbreviation and symbols, he wrote down in a private journal nearly everything that went on in this secret meeting. So that's the way we know what went on in this meeting and who said what and who came up with this plan and who came up with that plan. We know from Madison's notes that he himself addressed the convention no fewer than 161 times. So he got up in front of these people 161 times. Clearly, the quiet, soft-spoken James Madison had a lot to say about this. But then, no one had thought more about the Constitution making than he had. Remember, he got there early and he had been thinking before everybody else showed up how the Articles of Confederation didn't work and we should create this new Constitution. So he already had all these ideas and plans, and he researched and he read all of that. We talked about that in the other chapters. Okay, so with the decision about secrecy made, the delegates turned to the business that brought them to Philadelphia. That business was to decide the kind of central government the United States of America should have. That was why they were there. Remember, they had called this meeting because the Articles of Confederation gave the United States a very weak central government. It gave them all these things, told them you have the right to declare war, you have the right to build roads and all this stuff. But hey, wait, you can't collect taxes and you can't raise an army. That made no sense. So let's talk about the Virginia Plan on page 46. Now, obviously, it's called the Virginia Plan because delegates from Virginia came up with the plan. So Edmund Randolph of Virginia asked to speak first. As governor of the state, so Edmund Randolph was the governor of the state of Virginia. He headed the Virginia delegation. It was his job to present the ideas that Madison and the others had been working on. These ideas came to be called the Virginia Plan. The Virginia delegation, Randolph told the convention, would offer some proposals shortly. But first, he said, it might be useful to talk generally about the things a central government should be able to do. So instead of coming in and saying, this is what Virginia says we should do, he said, hey, let's talk about, before we talk about any of these states having their plans or whatever, let's talk about what we think a central government should be able to do. And then let's come in with our ideas to solve that. So, according to him, a central government, said Randolph, should provide for the common defense. Makes sense. Your federal government should be able to defend the nation, especially if they're declaring war on somebody. That means it should be able to protect the American people against foreign enemies. If a country like England decided to come back and fight us again, or France, or Spain, or somebody else decided to fight against us, we needed to be able to protect ourselves. And they needed to be able to protect the people, because not everybody is in the military, right? Even now. So let's continue reading. Last sentence on page 46. The delegates listened thoughtfully, and they thought, you're right. There's no argument. There's no argument there. The government should be able to protect the people from foreign invaders. Page 47. It should protect the liberties of the American people, continued Randolph. Remember, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, liberty is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So these freedoms that the American people had, the federal government should be able to, protect those too, right? Nobody should be able to take those away. So the delegates, again, continue to listen, and no argument there either. It should be able to make laws about trade between states so that states would not be taxing each other's citizens. So that he's saying the federal government should be able to make these laws that say this state can't take, if Georgia is selling cotton to New York, they shouldn't be able to jack the price up and tax them equally and kind of regulate how much the states could charge the other citizens from other states when they needed supplies, right? And again, the delegates agreed. There's no argument there. The federal government should be able to do that, right? So, continuing on page 47, it should provide for the general welfare of the people. That meant doing things for the good of the people, not just the people of one state or another. So the federal government needed to be able to, if I'm going to build roads here in New York, the federal government should also be able to build roads in South Carolina or in Maine or wherever, whatever state, and should be able to have the funds to do that. And once again, no disagreement from anyone. So far, all the delegates are like, yes, Mr. Randolph, you're correct. That's right. The federal government should be able to do that. But Randolph continued, under the Articles of Confederation, the central government could not do these things. So he went ahead and he led them into this. Remember, there was people who didn't think that they needed to replace the Articles of Confederation. Well, he just showed them that they do. He's a very good negotiator here. He went in and said, well, this is what they should be able to do, right? And they were like, well, yes, they should. They should be able to do that. Yes. And he's like, well, you can't under these, so we should come up with something else, right? So to them, a government would need the power to raise an army without having to beg the states for soldiers. It would need the power to collect its own taxes without having to beg the states for money. And it would need many more powers besides. So Randolph then described what the new government might look like. And we'll be reading about that shortly. So he led them, all the delegates, into this thought pattern. He was like, okay, so this is what they should have, right? And they all agreed and said, yes, it should. Yes, it should. Yes, it should. And then he said, okay, well, right now it can't. So this new agreement that we're going to come up with needs to be able to do those things, just like you said it should be able to. Smart guy. Anyway, so if you look on the scroll that's on page 47, right there, all right, it says, these are a few ideas that the delegates debated. So the powers of the central government should have. Again, these are things that we just read through. It should be able to protect the people against enemies. It should be able to protect the liberties of its citizens, the freedoms. It should be able to control trade between the different states and provide for the good of all the people, as well as raise money through some form of taxation. So this is what the delegates were going to debate about what the central government should or shouldn't be able to do. Okay? All right, so if we go on to page 48, look, there's a picture of Edmund Randolph, okay? Oh, I keep calling him Edward. Edmund Jennings Randolph spoke first at the Constitutional Convention. He presented Virginia's plan for change in government. Okay, so let's finish reading about him on page 48. By the end of that day, a few delegates were becoming uncomfortable. Because remember, not all of them, they didn't come to change the article or to scrap and get rid of the Articles of Confederation. So now they're starting to feel like, oh, maybe we, I don't know. So, yes, they said the Virginians are probably right. So they agreed with the Virginians, said, yeah, these things are probably right. But they wanted to know where Randolph's argument was leading. Randolph did not let them wonder long. The next day, he spoke again. So the next day he comes in, and the Virginia delegation, he said, believed that the central government must be able to deal directly with the people, instead of depending on the kindness of the state governments. In certain areas, it must have powers higher than those of the states. In those areas, the central government must have the supreme power. So right now, you have all the states, they had made their state constitutions, right? And so all the states had this power. And then they came together and they had the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation was for the central government, and it didn't give the central government certain powers over those states. So the states still had more power, not the central government. But he came in and he said, in certain instances, like things with taxes and raising an army, the federal government needs to have the supreme power over that. It doesn't need to rely on the states, hoping on the kindness of the states. Are they going to give us people? Are they going to let us have some money so we can make roads and whatever else the federal government needed to do? They needed to have that power. So now we're on to page 48. A strong central government, and there's a question mark after that because there's people going, really? We just got out of a war where because our central government from England was very strong, and we don't necessarily want them to have too much power. Okay, so let's keep reading, page 48. But wait, there's more. Wasn't the whole idea of the Articles of Confederation that the states had supreme power? Yes, it was. Now, here was Governor Randolph from Virginia saying that we needed a national government that would be supreme over the states in some areas. That last statement of Randolph's met with a long silence. So remember, beforehand, everybody's like, yes, he's right. Yes, he's right. Now they're like, what you talk about, Willis? Oh, Randolph. Anyway, so that remember, Congress had called this convention to revise. Revise means to edit, to make it better. Revise the Articles. Whoop, my papers are flowing. Articles of Confederation, not to throw them out. Now, in case we're on the top of page 49, now in the very first week of the convention, the Virginia delegation was asking the convention to do just that. They said, let's scrap those Articles of Confederation. Let's start this whole thing over again. Let's do this right. Okay? So when the discussion finally began, it was long and sometimes heated. Heated meaning not the heat in the room, but like angry. People were getting mad. After a time, the delegates put aside this difficult issue to discuss other parts of the Virginia plan. But the issue had been raised, and it remained in the mind of all of them. So on June 15th, William Paterson of New Jersey introduced an alternative to the Virginia plan. His plan, which became known as the New Jersey plan because he was from Jersey, or a small state plan, his plan, which became known as the New Jersey Plan or Small State Plan, called for adding amendments to the articles instead of replacing them. So instead of Virginia Plan wanted to replace the Articles of Confederation, the New Jersey Plan, let's just amend them. Let's edit them, make them better. Let's not scrap the whole thing. The next day, Edmund Randolph from Virginia argued that the amending the articles would not fix its problems. The delegates did not meet the next day on Sunday because it's the Lord's Day. On Monday, when they met again, Alexander Hamilton gave a long speech calling for an even more powerful national government than the Virginia plan had actually said. So Alexander Hamilton, he came in and said, you know what? Virginia plan's good, but it could be better. It could be, Okay, so on June 19th, after a long speech by Madison, the convention made the big decision to write a new constitution that would create a new, stronger central government for the United States of America. They would not attempt to amend the Articles of Confederation. So after all of this debate and this arguing back and forth about should we replace the Articles of Confederation or should we just amend them and fix them, they, on that June 19th, on that day, they decided as a group, all right, you guys, you know what, you're right. We should just scrap these Articles of Confederation and we should start all over. And that's what we're going to talk about in chapter 7, okay, in the next video. So now I'd like you to go and answer all the questions in the reading comprehension questions. And if you have further questions about those questions and you want further explanation, then you need to come join me in the Google Meets time from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Thursday. Ask your questions of me, and I will be happy to further explain them to you. All right? See you guys.